Our topic is voice this morning, and what incredible voices we're hearing. Yeah, get an amen for that. Thank you very much. So, maybe I should apologize ahead of time. I'm not one to stay at the lectern, all right? And I love this space. I can move around, I can see everyone, I can dance. I was thinking about jumping up on that piano, but I'll save you that. Bear with me. You know, sometimes I find it helpful, in order to look forward, we should first look back. And I recently learned that in the 1920s, the men at San Quentin State Prison in California started the first and the only newspaper of its kind that was published within the walls of a prison. Now, over the years, the newspaper at San Quentin State Prison has been pretty much censored at all points in time for one reason or another. It's been suspended multiple times, shut down time and time again. And yet that hasn't stopped these men from publishing that newspaper. It hasn't stopped these men from writing, from researching, from editing, from putting out that newspaper. And today there are over 15 incarcerated men who are employed by San Quentin Times, or 7 advisors who work with the men to put it together. There are a whole handful of volunteers. The publication is sent to over 20 prisons throughout California, and they even boast readership from around the world. People are reading San Quentin Times. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Well, recently, one of the men, who is a journalist for San Quentin Times, and you can imagine this is a lot of work. I mean, a newspaper of that scope and of that size takes a lot of hard work. And he was asked, you know, why do you put so much time and energy and effort into this thing? And this is what he said. He said, "My voice is the only thing that's still free." Let me run that back for you. My voice is the only thing that's still free. How many of us are free in body and yet our voice remains locked up behind bars? Captive to the judgment and to the expectations of those whose opinions we have allowed to control us? And here's the paradox too, right? When we think about this, oftentimes the people whose opinions we have allowed to control us are the very same people we love the most. They're our parents, they're our siblings, they're our partners, they're our friends, and how we love them and how they love us, and how at times that love can stifle our voice because we are to fit their expectations and we are to live up to their judgment. How many of us are free in body and yet our voice remains locked up behind bars, incarcerated by the prejudice of those who persistently refuse to see us as anything but a stereotype? They've already assigned us a role in their narrative, in their understanding of the world, just based on how we look, the color of our skin, the way we speak, the places that we come from. Some of us may be guilty of that. Some of us may do that ourselves, let's be real. And some of us may also have experienced that time and time again. How many of us are free in body and yet our voice remains locked up behind bars, chained by fear, chained by self-doubt, chained by willingness to play small? Because let's be honest, we'd rather play it safe than take the risk of screwing up. We'd rather play it safe than take the risk of failing, of not being perfect, of not living up to our image of who we are, what we should be. And as a result, our passions, our talents, our dreams, our hopes are often set to the side. And we stifle our voice. We keep our voices behind bars out of fear of what might happen if we release them. How many of us are free in body, and yet our voice remains locked up behind bars? That's a hard question to sit with. And it's one that inspired one of the artists within our community, Noreen Nasser, to compose, and I worked with her, we had a good time, and created this poem that I want to share with you.
So don't waste your time. They told me, don't waste your time on these silly hobbies. They told me, don't waste your time on these silly hobbies, your little daydreams. They will lead you nowhere and will yield you nothing. And I agreed. And how dare I disgrace the honorable hard work of my father, who toiled land and herded buffalo, real work, work with purpose, then crossed oceans to study science books, real words, words that carry fact, then earned diplomas while working night shifts, odd jobs adrift, and facing the twisted smirks of store clerks who wouldn't understand his immigrant English. So don't waste your time on these silly hobbies, I told myself. They won't lead me anywhere. So I swallowed my interests, quietly flirted with my secret passions. My heart fluttered shyly at the thought of dance and music and poetry and paint and love and my own words in my own voice. I was a stranger to that sound. And yet she'd visit from time to time, and slowly she'd unfurl herself to me and demand my attention from years of neglect and decades of dissension. I gave way to her ascension and faced her for the very first time. I am here for your unraveling. I am coming home to you, my voice. And what does it feel like? It feels like rapture. It is like revolution, the silent, steady kind, that's whispered quietly under my breath, that's born in my heart and built strong in my chest, then released like a full-throated scream puncturing your peace. It is sacred and scary, like a riot. It is like crying to my Lord at the end of my day, when the world has fallen short of my expectations. And I have nothing to say except that God must have put this flame in my heart for a reason. This is not passion, it is fervor. You see, I am exhaling 26 years of held breath. And that is like breathing fire.
After I graduated from divinity school, I went rogue. And what I mean by that is that I have been more or less groomed to serve a traditional congregation somewhat like this one. And don't get me wrong, I love traditional congregations. Like, as you can tell, I enjoy preaching. So I love congregations like this one. I have so many close friends and colleagues who faithfully and lovingly serve congregations like this one. Reverend Jonathan Rogers, we are grateful to have people like you in this world, right? Serving congregations like this one. So don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on traditional congregations. But I realized that I was being called down a different path. I found myself in Washington, D.C., and for those of you who are familiar with Washington, D.C., you probably know that that city is at once an incredibly diverse and yet strikingly segregated city at the same time. Fitting, I think, as a symbol for our country as being the nation's capital. Incredibly diverse and yet strikingly segregated at the same time. And I had this impossible dream that maybe, just maybe, we could create a space in that city where people of diverse racial and religious and cultural and ethnic backgrounds could come together could meet people they otherwise would never have a chance to meet, build those lasting, deep friendships that last a lifetime, that they could claim their spiritual and creative voices, that they could share those voices with one another, and that they could put their art and their soul in service of social change. I had this crazy, impossible dream, and of course the challenge is in the execution. And I kept on asking myself, is this even possible? And I was yearning to hear this voice, because I heard a lot of voices. I heard the voices of my parents saying one thing, and I heard the voices of my colleagues saying something else. I heard the voices of my mentors saying one thing, the voices of my professors saying one thing, the voices of other folks in my life whose opinions I valued saying something else. I heard the voices of my denomination saying one thing, and the voices of Pew Research studies and other demographic studies saying something very different. And I had all of these voices in my head. I had these voices that were wondering whether I had what it took, whether I was smart enough, whether I should spend more time in a traditional congregation before I start something. And then other voices that said, no, don't spend any time in a traditional congregation, just go start something. And then voices asking me, do I have enough leadership potential? Do I have enough credentials? Do I have enough enthusiasm? Do I have enough? I heard all of these voices except for the voice that I actually valued the most. The voice of purpose, the voice of reassurance, the voice of that mystery that I call God. I could hear all of these voices, but I could not hear the voice of God, which I found kind of odd, because after all, I had just mastered divinity. I mean, I'd spent a good number of years praying and meditating. I hadn't quite made it up to the level of levitating yet, but I was getting there. And I asked myself, no matter how hard I try, I cannot hear the voice of God. And I have to believe that the medieval Muslim theologian Al-Ghazali experienced that deafening silence as well. And it forced him to ask this question: how can I know God if I do not even know myself? That's right. How can I know God if I do not even know myself? Last year I spent about 6 months actively participating in a halaqah, which is a Muslim prayer and conversation circle. It was actually hosted by Noreen, whose video you just saw. And so she lived in Arlington, Virginia. I'd jump on the metro, get down there every Tuesday night for a couple hours. We'd gather, about 5 or 6 of us, in her apartment. Comfy chairs, delicious tea, some food to kind of nibble on. And we'd start out by checking in, how you doing? How's your day going? How's your week doing? How's your heart? How's your soul? We'd then kind of join together in this prayer. And following that, we would just have conversation. Needless to say, I was the only non-Muslim there. I'm a minister to add to it, so that was a little bit awkward. But I have never felt, by the end of that, I had never felt more at home in my voice than with those people. And we would just have the most incredibly interesting conversations. We'd ask ourselves, what does liberation mean? What does sexual empowerment mean? Is there a place for modesty and self-discipline in sexual empowerment? What does it mean to be a good brother or a good sister? What does it mean to be a good parent or a good sibling? What does it mean to devote yourself to something that forces you to make sacrifices in your life? What does it mean to devote yourself to something that will force you to do things a little bit different than other folks do? Can you even be fun to be around if you're not getting trashed at the bar on Saturday night? We asked all these questions, had these incredibly rich conversations, and then not too long ago I was reflecting back on this and I realized how odd it was that we almost never talked about religion. And that puzzled me for a while, because this was an intentionally religious or spiritual space, and yet we really didn't spend much time talking about religion, and I couldn't quite understand that until I stumbled across this piece of writing by the Christian theologian Simone Weil, and she said this: "It is not the way you talk about God, but the way you talk about the things of this world that best shows whether you have experienced divine love." Let me run that back for you. It is not the way you talk about God, but the way you talk about the things of this world that best testifies, best shows whether you have in fact experienced divine love. Does that resonate with anyone in this room? If we are to talk about the things of this world out of a place of having experienced love, out of a place of having experienced divine love, then we have to learn how to hear the things of this world. We have to learn how to listen to the voices of the things of this world. And that means getting beyond generalizations. It means not talking about voices in the abstract, but very particular voices, voices in their radical particularity, no longer talking about the immigrant's voice or the millennial's voice or the baby boomer's voice or the atheist's voice, but talking about that specific atheist's voice, that atheist who sings Rihanna in the shower, that specific atheist who loves to grab one of those delicious coffee milkshakes from Chick-fil-A on their way back from from work. That particular atheist who says a prayer to a God they don't believe in before they send their kids off to school in the morning. That particular atheist's voice, that voice in its particularity, that is our challenge, I think, to listen to each and every one of our voices in its radical uniqueness and particularity. And the good news is that this is a place where we get to practice. I really believe that congregations, communities like this is a place where we get to learn how to listen to one another, which is a very rare skill, if you've probably noticed, to really listen, to really hear, not just project, not just imagine, but give voice the space that it needs to express itself. This is the type of place where we do it, because this is a place where we say we need not think alike to love alike. This is a place where our differences don't have to divide us, but in fact can invite us to see the world in a new way. This is the kind of place I want to believe where, though our voices may sound different, they can still sound beautiful. They need not sound the same to be harmonious. This is the kind of place where we practice. Recently at the sanctuaries, and y'all kind of got a little flavor of it, we started this brand new program that brings 10 different artists of diverse racial and religious backgrounds together and helps them connect their spiritual life to their artistic practice in direct service of social change. We had heard from a number of the folks within our community and beyond our community that they were artistic and they wanted to be of service, but they didn't know how to do it. And so we said, well, we can help you do that. And we also heard from all of these grassroots justice organizations that were working on really important causes: public housing, environmental justice, racial justice, you name it. All of these really important campaigns that were strapped for cash, And they would say to us, you know, art is one of the most important pieces of this. Without good art, we can't convey our message in a creative way. Without art, we can't mobilize people. Without art, we can't inspire and sustain people for the long haul. We need art, and yet if we're honest, our funders are not going to fund art. Art is one of the first things that is going to go. We don't know where to look, and we don't have the resources, but we need it, and we recognize the need. And so we heard that, and we brought these folks together, and we said, we can help you learn, you artists. We can help you learn how to make a difference, and you campaign. We can help artistically source your justice work. Now, one of the participants, we had a 3-month pilot of this program in the spring, and one of our participants, Kirsten, came up to me, I'll never forget this, at the end of one of our Monday rehearsals, tears in her eyes. And she said, Rev, I have always been embarrassed about my voice. And yet I'm finally starting to see that being different isn't being wrong or being bad. I'm finally starting to find a place for my voice in this world. I want you to hear Kirsten's voice. What are we keeping from the world by keeping our voice locked up behind bars? Ask yourself that question. What are you keeping from the world? The way that Kirsten was keeping that voice from the world, by keeping it locked up behind bars. And I'm not just talking about how well you sing. I'm talking about what you have to say. I'm talking about your story, your life story, the wisdom that you have gathered over the years. I'm talking about your deepest hopes for who you could be, for the impact that you could make in this world, your aspirations for the difference that you want to make in this life. I'm talking about your dreams. I'm talking about your hopes. I'm talking about your voice. What are you keeping from this world? By keeping your voice locked up behind bars, and even more importantly, what might this world look like, feel like, sound like if we were to release our voices? In a minute, we're going to give that a shot. Now you're saying to yourself, oh man, what did I get into here? In a minute, when I tell you, all of us at the same time are going to allow our voices to be free for a minute. For some of us, that might be a hum. I know we got some hummers in there. For some of us, it may be a single word that means something really important to you. Galaxy, stars, compassion, uncertainty, whatever it is. In a second, I'm going to invite us to take a deep breath in, and as we breathe out, to hum or to say a word or two together. Are you all with me? And I want you to be present to this, experience this, and see what it feels like to let your voice free for a minute. Ready? Breathe in and out. I need it louder than that. We can do better. Lay your voice free. Ready? Grab a breath when you need and keep it going. Love. Sustenance. There we go. Give yourself permission right now not to worry about the judgment and the expectations and all that stuff. Just let it out. And listen to the beauty of this. That is the sound of voices that are free. May your voice be free as well. Amen. I understand we have music for meditation. I don't know if that is separate than the music we just made together. It is. All right, very good.
Our music for meditation is in the Great Hymnal, number 396. I know this rose will